Hello. And as you may notice if you're watching this right now visually, there's no one on this couch with me. I am going a solo dolo episode today. So, welcome, crew, to Therapist Unhinged podcast. I am your therapist for today, not for a session, but just for a talk. Taylor Moore here with you guys, LPC. We're getting started with something I'm very excited about. It's our first kind of disorder series, which you're going to kind of see a little bit more of as you move through these episodes. But this first disorder series, we're going to focus in on eating disorders. Something I feel very passionate about, as you may know if you were in here for the first kind of few episodes. I got into this realm as a therapist and didn't know necessarily what my niche was going to be, what I was going to specialize in. And like I said, you find what your flow is, you find what you really enjoy working with and diagnoses you enjoy working with. It was eating disorders for me. And when it comes down to it, I personally was affected by this diagnosis. It went unchecked, it went under silence, and I understand the importance of that. Luckily, my journey led me to where I am on this couch as a therapist, and I was able to move past that disorder even without being diagnosed and recognizing it for what it was and recognizing that, hey, this is important work and this is an important discussion because majority of the people in our lives might be affected by this at some point in their life. So, if left unchecked, these can become chronic disorders for people. And they tend to happen within an age range of like 12 to 20s on that onset. So, you might realize that, like, hey, there might be someone in your life going through this. One of the things I like to touch on with eating disorders today, like I said, we're going to be really psychoeducational here. Apologies. Sorry. Actually, not sorry because you saw the logo. The title is literally going to be Intro to Eating Disorders by Taylor Moore. So you knew what you signed up for. So apology taken back. I will say this too. Today is going to be a little quick episode. One of the main things today, like I said, it's just me. And it really was kind of, hey, Maddie's like, "You're kind of the ED." Oh, you'll hear me say that a lot too. Eating disorders, ED is how I kind of abbreviate it. So if you hear that, that's what that means. You're the ED expert. And I don't want to say expert, but she did like hype me up like that. She was like, "You got this." I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous to kind of get on the couch by myself, but I was like, hey, had to press play, had to accept reality and just be like, let's move with this. So I appreciate you being here and listening to me. But again, me going on my tangents and Maddie's not here to pull me back. So I will say this. This is the intro episode. We're going to have a few more as we go by. I'll kind of tease those a little bit later, but there is going to be 4 episodes to this disorder series. So we're very excited to start this. But we couldn't start the series without giving you kind of this insight and this intel. So it's important to just reflect on it. It's important for you to just have this information, but to start you with this information. I don't want you to be like, oh, Taylor is all 30 minutes. I discussed everything ED, eating disorder related. No. I want you to stay curious and let that ball roll. If this is your first time ever talking about this, tapping into this, perfect. Let that be that initial spark of that flame, whether it's for yourself, others around you, you have children, you have friends, loved ones. It's just good to be aware because this is one of the most under the radar disorders that goes on. And when I say a lot of people in the world deal with these disorders specifically, I mean it. It's something that, has a lot of myths and stigmatism to it, especially in culture. But as mental health is on the rise, we can start to dive into these more and start to educate, our viewers, the people around us. And, like I said, I'm very passionate about it. So let's go ahead and dive in. I know I talked a little bit about my kind of journey into it. I dealt with my own eating disorder back in college. And I think, again, it feeds into that realm of, hey, I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I was still developing. I was changing my eating habits. I was going to college, and I was a runner as well. So there was kind of layers to it as well as when I'm moving through it. My identity, shifting who I'm going to be, sports was involved. So I noticed that I started to kind of develop my own ED. And I think whenever I reflect on it, I wasn't diagnosed. I want to say that. But I know now as a clinician and looking back on my habits and my behaviors, I definitely was going through my own disorder at that time. Luckily, I took steps to make changes, but I thoroughly believed my behaviors were, you know, inactions and saying, hey, like, this will make me a faster runner. This is what I need to do. This is what my body needs to look like. And recognizing that there was something wrong whenever my bones started to deteriorate, whenever I started to notice I was getting shin splints a lot more, and also even my period stopped. I noticed something was going on, and I luckily got checked and was told that I was malnourished. And that switched a light bulb in my head where I was like, I had a doctor telling me that something was wrong. Now, I wish I could say that was the end all be all, everything was fixed, but that was just kind of the light bulb that something needed to change. And it was an ongoing process. Again, something I did in silence, something I did without treatment, and eventually ended up going into therapy on myself and um, going into therapy for another reason, but started to kind of realize even further and reflecting on that with my therapist that I was like, wow, that was what was going on. Again, still something I think I like to reflect back on because knowledge is power of our past, but it also keeps me in check if I'm starting to, fall into symptoms of behaviors. Because when it comes down to it, I'm still a very physically active person. I teach spin classes regularly. I am in two-piece uniforms, outfits, sports bras where my stomach is out and noticing like, hey, like there are realms to this life of being physically active that had triggered my ED, had affected me in that past. So it's staying vigilant with it has definitely helped. And again, since I moved through it with silence, I think that that was what made me so passionate getting into it for others. Like Maddie said in for the first episode, we get into it because we get it. And trust me, I get it. So I want to just kind of acknowledge that and just express that in the most obviously vulnerable way, but also not to make this all about me. I want us to just dive into what we have on the agenda today. So, today we're going to dive in and we'll actually just start with kind of the basics of what you'll kind of hear along the next few episodes because I want to give that like terminology and back kind of door those things for you guys. And so you have that intel whenever you get into those episodes and you start to hear this lingo. So we have the specific diagnoses in the DSM-5 that come into play. Number 1, and I hate ranking these, but it is kind of true. The most typical one that we hear is anorexia nervosa, and that is obviously characterized by a restriction of food intake and intense fear of gaining weight. So whenever we think about that, we have a kind of very distorted body image, and when I say distorted body image, that's another terminology I wanted to clarify on. When I say distorted body image, it means our perception of our body doesn't match the reality of what is we're perceiving something totally different that's going on. So those are things that kind of come in with anorexia nervosa. It includes compulsive behaviors like excessive exercise and ritualistic eating, but can be restrictive type or binge and purging type as well. So there can be kind of layers to it. But the main categorization for anorexia nervosa is restriction of food intake. So I wanted to kind of dabble into that. But that's the most kind of prevalent one we see. And that not necessarily even see. I would say it's one of the ones we see most, but it's one of the ones I feel like a lot of people know of. So whenever you think of eating disorders, you think of, oh, they're not eating. That's a myth. So I want y'all to kind of just have that in the back of your head because we're going to go over myths soon. Taylor, pull it back. Okay, back to the DSM-5 diagnoses. So we have anorexia nervosa that we just recovered. So next one that kind of you'll hear a lot of is bulimia nervosa, which is involving recurrent binge eating followed by compensatory behaviors like vomiting and laxatives and overexercising. So we kind of have those episodes of binge eating followed by that behavior of vomiting or purging. And this is often done in secret and carries very intense shame, obviously, with that binge eating coming into those behaviors afterwards to kind of punish or absolve. It looks like in so many different angles for these people who undergo these diagnoses. So the next one we'll go over. Oh, one thing I do want to add with bulimia nervosa is individuals are typically within a normal, quote unquote, normal weight range whenever we see this. So it's very easily missed whenever we do see people deal with these eating disorders. And then the next one I'll go into is binge eating disorder, which is a recurrent episode of eating large quantities of food in a short period, often feeling out of control in these periods, but not usually or regularly purging or engaging in those behaviors like in bulimia nervosa. So, not necessarily purging behaviors afterwards. So, those are kind of the top three. Now, I'm going to kind of maybe lead you into some that you haven't heard of before. Of course, if you've haven't heard of the top 3 before, that's okay too. This is an educational thing, not to shame or not to say like, "Oh, how could you not know this?" We want you to kind of be aware. So with these next ones, I will say AFRID is what I usually refer to it as, or ARFID, and that is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is ARFID for the abbreviation. So that's why you'll kind of hear me say ARFID. And this involves extreme avoidance of restriction of food that is not based on body image concerns. And then this could come from a lot of different fears, phobias, sensory sensitivities. So this one tends to come a lot of with a stigma of, oh, that the person's a quote unquote picky eater. So a lot of the times this goes you know, undiagnosed because of that. But a lot of the times there's comorbidity with this, whether there's intense phobias, intense anxiety, or autism. So there's a lot of things that come with it. I will say, not just for ARFID, there's a lot of comorbidity when it comes to a lot of these eating disorders, which we'll go into that a little bit more. I just kind of went ahead of myself. So the next one we have is other specified feeding or eating disorders, which, ED symptoms that cause significant distress or impairment, but don't necessarily fit into other categories. So it's definitely, we see these ED symptoms, but we don't necessarily have that specific category for them to fall in. But saying, hey, we're acknowledging there's an eating disorder or disordered eating right here. So examples of this is atypical anorexia, meets all the criteria, but is within or slash below that average weight. Purging disorder, purging without binging. There's even night eating syndrome. But guess what? The most common diagnosis, it is one of the most common diagnosis in the treatment setting. A lot of the times before we go into, uh, diagnosing people, it usually just starts with saying like, "Hey, we're noticing symptoms," but maybe this is kind of that like default before we can narrow in, or maybe this is where we sit at, especially if there's comorbidity. And then one of the last ones I'll kind of go over that maybe you haven't heard of is unspecified feeding or eating disorder. This is used when symptoms are clearly present but don't fully meet the criteria or enough info isn't available. So often a placeholder, kind of similar to the other one I was saying, but used in an ER acute settings a lot of the time. So definitely clarifies differences in shared traits and normalizes that EDs don't always look the way that media portrays them. So a lot of the times when you see media and social media, you'll kind of have those kind of first two or three kind of show up or you recognize them in that way. But that's just kind of one box or one or two different boxes. But when it comes to eating disorders, there's an array of symptoms that we just want to be aware of. And yes, there are these diagnoses that we've kind of started to label more and more as obviously time goes by. We talk about how the DSM 5 grows and is ever evolving and changing, but also saying that just because we don't lie under one of these diagnoses doesn't mean that we don't have disordered eating or disordered eating isn't prevalent. So just kind of be aware of that. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of clarification on, again, this is so basic. I want you to know if you're ever curious about these even more, please go further. I am not one all fits all, end all, be all about eating disorders. So just let this be that start, or let that be that, first domino effect for you. But yeah, wanted to name some of those just to get you started. And so you have kind of this verbiage whenever we get into these episodes coming up. So next I want to kind of talk about and pivot over to myths that might come up. A lot of, like I said, that stigmatization that comes with, I don't want to say just with eating disorders, but it's definitely something that, like I said, this is why it's so under the radar, so not talked about enough. Like we said, we kind of started to utilize depression, anxiety as normal labels, like, and started to kind of talk about those. Now I feel like there's just still a stigma on eating disorders and what that looks like. And I want to say the myths is one of the ways that we can kind of destigmatize here, but also correct. So I think a few common myths that I put down that I wanted to kind of go over with you, if y'all don't mind, is you can tell who has an eating disorder by just looking at them. And let's just be real here, that's not the case. So, ED exists across all body types, ages, races, genders. It's it doesn't discriminate. When it comes down to it, just because a person is thin does not mean that they have an eating disorder or ED. So I want to also say that doesn't mean that they don't, but it also is saying that they're not the only ones who go through this. A lot of people think that, oh, because someone's so thin, that's the only factor, or that's the one thing that we have to look for. So I want to just kind of clarify that this affects all body types, all ages, all genders. So, like I said, many times, I know I talked about it in one of the eating disorders that we discussed, but a lot of times people are atypical and are presenting at an average body weight, or a larger body weight. So, doesn't necessarily fit into that appearance box. That's not what we're looking for as clinicians. So, also, we'll dive into the next one. Eating disorders only affects the young or girls. Like I said, this does not discriminate. And sometimes, like I said, that onset can come in around that 12 to 20 range. But if left unchecked, it can become a chronic issue. So it can be ongoing. It can go into your 30s. It can show up again in your later years. So recognizing that if gone unchecked, it can definitely affect people in their older years. And I will say, as a clinician, I've seen kiddos as young as 5 with ED or eating disorders. So it's not saying like, hey, I tell you an average, that's where it starts. No, it does not discriminate when it comes to age. Now, like I said, gender, or sexual orientation, or sexual, just kind of anything, I will say that it does impact females more commonly, but it does not only affect females. So I will say this, I think when it comes down to it affecting men, women, I want to say that when we have such a narrow mindset about who it affects, it lets that sit in silence more. So I will say it's very scary to think about the LGBT community, men, and even women. I just want to say, like, whenever we think that people cannot have this or don't have this commonly, that's not curious of you. And that allows this to go under the radar. So opening up that space and just recognizing that this affects everyone is the first step. So the next one I will say, a good myth is it's just about food or wanting to be skinny. So again, we talked on a lot of a few different, diagnoses, but I want you to know that it's not always about food. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about regulation or emotional regulation. Sometimes it's undergoing trauma, or realizing that there's trauma involved, PTSD. It has to do with identity, perfectionism, obsessive compulsive disorder might be an underlying factor, just because there's so much comorbidity with these diagnoses. That's where it's saying it's not just about the food. A lot of the times, these things are, I will say it too. I know I'm going off, but when it comes down from what I've seen as a clinician, eating disorders are usually like what is just bringing them in. Doesn't help that I work at an eating disorder clinic, but usually that's what is presenting. But what's underneath is the real work: trauma, depression, anxiety, OCD. Like these are things that have just been like stewing and unchecked. And now it's saying, like, how is this presenting itself now? And how it's presenting itself now is saying, hey, this eating disorder is now present. And sometimes that eating disorder got out of hand and is showing up for them in an unhealthy way. So, again, not just about food or wanting to be skinny. A lot of the times it has a lot more emotional impact, social, cultural impact, social media, generational impact, genetic impacts. So, just recognizing that there's a lot of layers to this. Don't be naive to that. So, another myth, obviously, if people are eating, they must be fine. Again, that doesn't necessarily agree with those diagnoses that I showed to you earlier. Eating, it does not mean that someone is fine. A lot of these behaviors go unchecked or unnoticed because they are done in silence and when they're alone. So recognizing that. Another one, it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. Ugh, I hate that. I don't even like that. That just hurt in my mouth because I even think about like kids going through that and just recognizing that, hey, like that age range, like I said, that typical age range it falls under is that like 12 to 25. So people are like, yeah, I went through it too. What does that even mean? Like, what do you mean you went through it too? It didn't feel good, did it? So why would you just say it's just a phase? Like they'll grow out of it. Acknowledgement. I will say this as someone who has gone through it before. I'm sitting on this couch with you because, hey, it's not just a phase, it's suffering, it's a struggle. And don't just get out of it, heal from it, and recognize that that's how you effectively get out of it. So, got off my couch there. I was like, why did I even write that? That heated me up. And then, ooh, this is attention seeking behavior. Ha! When it comes down to it, usually eating disorders, from what I've noticed, are deeply, deeply private. Like I talked to you about in silence. A lot of the times, a lot of people don't want people to know that these behaviors are going on. Um, so that's definitely one that I've seen, and that's naive for people to think that people do these things for that attention. And obviously, minimizing in this way increases the stigma. So don't do that. Yeah, I would never punch anyone, but that was my punching sound. And then what's the next one? Oh, I think that might be it. So those are a few of my myths. Obviously, if y'all have a few that y'all want to bring up, I can definitely debunk some things. But I'm sure as we go through the next few episodes, and we have Maddie here with her therapist brain, she can bring some more to the table. So, like I said, we talked a lot of the times of how they go unnoticed, where they kind of start to become prevalent. Like I said, generational trauma, generational influences. We talk about that. The role of social media, social cultural influences, diet culture. That's a big thing. I mean, gosh, I feel like that's been around like my whole life. So I think about the women that came before me and kind of this trickle down effect that's slowly been happening. Obviously, there's been changes towards bettering health and understanding what is the difference of just health. I'm doing my air quote signs. I know not the people listening to this can't hear my air quote signs, but understanding what health is, but also understanding what wellness is. So, one of my favorite quotes, I wish I could quote them right now, but it's saying health is like that physical aspect, but wellness is that mental state. And I think you need both. I know you need both. You need both to corroborate. So you can have that physical health, but is your wellness okay? Is your mental state okay behind it? But yeah, understanding the role of diet culture and just cultural influences is so important. in your life and in others. And then, like I said, trauma is a big thing too. So, a lot of the times, this is ways that we gain control. This is ways of suffering. This is ways of grieving. This is ways of a lot of different behaviors that show up for these diagnoses. Perfectionism, control, like I said, obsessive compulsive disorder is among one of the ones that comes into the comorbidity play. I will say, I know obsessive compulsive disorder is one of the ones that shows up in body dysmorphic disorder. A lot of times you'll hear body dysmorphia, but it's a way of hyperfixating on or focusing in on overly on a certain body part, on a certain thing, whether face, body, it taps into that perfectionism. So it's just things to think about with that. Yeah. So co-occurring disorders, family identity, all those things come into play. So just recognizing that those are often sometimes the way they begin. You send your kid to school, you want to make sure that they talk to you or you're open on discussing those things and seeing what's kind of going on or how they're feeling. Is low self-esteem coming up? Is, body checking becoming a thing in the mirror? And of course, I don't want you to be like, oh, they looked in the mirror. These are just kind of things that I have seen personally along the way as a therapist. So find ways, keep Googling, no, well, I guess you could Google, but make sure it's a trusted website, Psychology Today. Don't WebMD it, but just making sure that you are getting the right facts behind these things. And then, yeah, so I will say this. I feel like that's kind of getting to the point of wrapping up. I did want to kind of talk in a little bit. Oh, yes. Hello. Let's go into just kind of treatments that kind of come up for this. I will say individual therapy, intensive individual therapy, kind of going in, whether you want to find someone who's specialized in eating disorders. I would flip my hair if it was down, but that would be me if you're not a family or friend. If you are a family or friend listening to this, I can refer you out. But if you're like, nope, Taylor, I've never met you before, I'm definitely one of those. And then, as well as going into a little bit more of the modalities that can potentially come up, CBT, DBT, those are the ones I usually use, CPT for obviously trauma focused, but just kind of recognizing that maybe family based, emotion focused treatments come in as well. So there's a lot of modalities that come in whenever you're doing individuals. But one thing too, groups are great because you resonate with people, you connect with people who are going through similar things. This normalizes this for you because you can hear it from me and you can be like, oh, Taylor, you might have gone through this before, but there is something about going through recovery with others. It's been proven to work because, yes, in ways that eating disorders can align with addiction disorders too, or addictive behaviors. So, like, it works with that, like AAA is a thing, and then, or AAA. AA is a thing. Oh my gosh. It's late. Sidebar. I literally think I promised Maddie we would never record after work again because we were so like crazy last time, or just disoriented. I'm totally there right now. So I don't even know how I look on this. I'm very excited for y'all to just pop off on these. Hopefully you're like, oh, this is only a 30-minute episode. I'm not gonna, nope, you need to listen to it because this is the insight to what we're about to do. So please listen to me, even though my internal dialogue is saying, like, oh, I hope nobody watches this. But then I still check the counts and see who watches this and see how many people did. So that was my sidebar. Circling back, certain types of treatments and therapies that work, groups, individuals, obviously recognizing if you're needing more intensive care, there's levels to it. Intensive outpatient, IOP, which you go in kind of throughout the week, PHP, partial hospitalization, and then inpatient, residential. You see what the care you're needing and you see where you fall in. You check in with a clinician on that. It's important to realize that, hey, maybe I'm needing more intensive work. Maybe I'm needing to meet with a therapist and a dietitian at the same time. And just recognizing that severity does tell you where you need to go. Is there medical stability needed to be found? So those are all the things that can come in. We will be talking on, well, I guess that's going to be kind of where I set up the series now. This was my episode. Next time, we'll have Maddie on here and kind of talking on it a little bit more, on her kind of journey with it as well. We have someone coming in from the sports world who's going to be talking on their journey and what they see still prevalent in sports. And then we'll have a dietitian come in. And along with that, I think with Maddie and I, we'll be kind of focusing more on treatment, recovery, along with Maddie's story. And then the next episode, like I said, with that sports kind of coach and judge, they were in competitive cheerleading at one point in their lives, which they'll kind of sit down and talk with me further on their journey and their story, but then also kind of what they're seeing. And then I'm going to go into more so on the sports and eating disorders and how we see it a lot in the fitness world. And then we'll also have Maddie talking in on that as well. And then we'll meet with a dietitian that I've worked with before and kind of what she sees and what her kind of tidbits are and, her point of view with it. So we have a lot of people coming in to kind of talk on certain topics with this. And I'm so excited, so, so excited to kind of continue exploring with this. Can't say I've been sweating, no arm sweat pits. So that's good. I will leave you here with that. But just thank you guys for coming in and just starting this process, starting this kind of journey into this eating disorder series. I am so looking forward to talking with you guys more, but I'm going to go the hell to sleep because I am freaking exhausted. And I am just happy I got this Monday episode out on Monday. Look at me, unhinged. I'm going to release it exactly at probably like 11:50 tonight just because my brain is like risky behavior. But I appreciate you guys. Stay the hell unhinged, and I will see you next time.